The unit that we're starting today is genetics. It's actually our second to last unit. So after this we have ecology and then we're going to be done. And so this unit will take us a couple weeks. We have your note packet. We have a couple different activities to do related to genetics, and probably looking at a quiz late next week or so. So I asked you in the beginning of class about genes. You guys had a pretty good idea about what genes were, which I don't think you ever actually learned about genetics or genes in school, did you? Yeah? I don't think it's part of the elementary curriculum, but maybe you just have heard about genes, in your everyday life. So you guys are close. So when we talk about genetics, genetics is the study of how traits are inherited, of heredity. What does that mean? If I say maybe a disease is hereditary, what does that mean, Kiara? Yeah, that's something that's passed on from generation to generation. Heredity is passing something on. And so genetics tells us how we inherit certain characteristics, certain traits throughout the generation. What is this shown on the right side? Yeah, that's a DNA molecule. How are you able to recognize it? How did you know that was a DNA molecule? Well, what about it? Yeah, it's shape. The DNA molecule has a distinctive shape. It's called the double helix. We'll talk more about it when we get to the end of this. All right, so let's start though. We're going to connect genetics, which we're about to study, to something that we already talked a little bit about, chromosomes. So, do you remember when we talked about chromosomes? Jordan?
Oh, in the reproduction?
In reproduction. And we also talked about it way back at the beginning of the year when we talked about cells. So what are chromosomes? Anyone have an idea? Brandon?
They're inside every cell there's 23 or 46 of them.
Yeah, so chromosomes are these structures within our cells. Where exactly within the cell are they located? Brandon? Yeah, they're located in the nucleus of our cells. And our chromosomes are where our genetic information is. Our DNA is stored in our chromosomes. Chromosomes are made of DNA and proteins. If you look at them under the electron microscope or in a light microscope, depends when you're looking at them, but often they'll appear as X's, these sort of puffy X's. Other times they might just be a single strand rather than two halves. And they're located in the nucleus of just about all of our cells. And they're important because they contain the instructions about how to build us. The chromosomes that you have in your cells contain the instructions to make you. Every single cell has a copy of those instructions. And the chromosomes are what get passed on from parents to their offspring. So you all have in your normal cells 46 chromosomes. 23 of your chromosomes you inherited from your mother, and the other 23 you inherited from your father. We all get half of our chromosomes from each parent. Grace?
So say mom has like a condition. And would that be passed down?
Sometimes, and we'll talk about that. So there are some characteristics, some traits, some diseases that are part of our genetics. And in those cases, sometimes they can be passed down from parents to offspring. And we'll talk about some of those things in a few minutes. So humans, Brandon mentioned it. How many chromosomes are in our body cells? Yeah? 46. They come in 23 pairs, 23 from each pair. And humans have 46 chromosomes. The number of chromosomes is defined by the type of species. So all humans, or normal or healthy humans, have 46 chromosomes in their body cells. Other species might have different numbers. For example, cats, they have 34 chromosomes in their cells. 17 pairs, 17 from each pair. What do you think? Take a guess. What do you think goldfish have? Savannah?
6.
6. Any other guesses? Brandon?
18.
18.
30.
16.
Okay. So yeah, you guys are all giving me numbers smaller than 34. Why? Yeah. Well, that's what I expected. There's actually 94 chromosomes.
I said 100. I was the closest.
So the number of chromosomes doesn't really tell you anything about the species. It's not related to the size of the organism, its complexity, its intelligence. It just sort of is whatever it has evolved to. Doesn't do that. So we can actually take a picture of the chromosomes within a cell. The way they do this is they use certain chemicals to stop a cell from dividing when the chromosomes are condensed like this. They stain the chromosomes, and then they get a picture. Okay. So here, each of these X's is a single chromosome. If you were to count these up, you'd find there are 46 there. And we call this a karyotype. Karyotype is basically a map, a picture of the chromosomes a person has. The way they used to do this is actually take a picture, print it out, cut out each individual chromosome, find its partner, and arrange them from longest to shortest. Nowadays, they do this on the computer. It's the same idea, match up chromosomes. And you end up with a diagram that looks something like this. So they number the chromosomes 1 through 22. They put the longest set first, and then arrange them according to length. They stain them so they have these pattern of bands on them. Now don't worry about like these are bent, they just happens to be the position they were in. You know, that doesn't mean anything that this top part of this chromosome is bent, it just is. Okay, and they arrange them. And these types of diagrams, these maps of a person's chromosomes actually can give you some information about them. Okay. And so you see here all the chromosomes lined up. 23. So one of these first pair of chromosomes, one of those came from this person's mother, and then the other one came from their father. And one of these came from the mother, one came from the father, and so on, all the way down. That's why we inherit 23 chromosomes from each parent. You'll notice they're numbered all the way up to 22, but then we have this last set here. What does it say? X and Y. These are a special set of chromosomes. In humans, sex is determined by a special set of chromosomes called the sex chromosomes. They're usually listed as the 23rd pair. And you'll see here they don't match up. For all the other chromosomes, they're the same size, but not for the sex chromosomes in this person. So the sex chromosomes come in either an X or a Y variation. Do you know which combination males have in humans? Alex? Well, they have two. Nope. Jenna?
X, Y.
Yeah. X and Y are the sex chromosomes of a male. So this obviously is a male because it has an X and a Y chromosome. You'll notice the X chromosome is pretty long, has lots of genes on it. However, in males, that Y chromosome is a short little tiny chromosome. It doesn't carry much genetic information, actually. What are females' sex chromosomes, do you think? So males are X and Y. Anybody know what a female might be? Ava?
Just an X?
Close, but not quite. They have two.
2 X's?
Two X's, yes. So 2 X chromosomes are female sex chromosomes. So if we think about this a little bit, we talked about cell division and gametes and so forth in reproduction. So is this, let's call, where meiosis, if you remember, is only happens to produce what? What? Somebody said it. It only happens to produce sex cells, to produce gametes. And it cuts the number of chromosomes in half. Because gametes have half the number of chromosomes. So if we look at this cell on the left, is this from a, and we're just focusing on the sex chromosomes for right now. Is this from a male or a female?
No.
I hear both. What is it? It's a female. XX is a female. So when a female cell splits through meiosis, it's what would we call these cells? What cell? What type of cell would these be? Jenna? Those are egg cells. Okay. Chromosomes got split in half. So every female egg cell has what sex chromosome in it? An X, because that's all the female has to put into the egg cells. Every egg cell has an X chromosome. However, what kind of cell is this? That's a male cell. When it produces, what are these? Sperm cells. Well, some of the sperm cells end up with the X chromosome, and other sperm cells end up with the Y chromosome. About half of all sperm cells contain an X in them, and the other half contain a Y in them. So what that means, during fertilization, when a sperm cell combines with an egg cell and brings its chromosomes in, okay, if this sperm cell fertilizes this egg cell, is that going to produce a male or female offspring? Female. Same thing, if it fertilizes this egg, that's going to be a female offspring. However, if this sperm cell fertilizes the egg,
It's a male.
it's a male. So which parent actually determines the gender of the offspring? Claudia? The male. Which sperm cell fertilized egg is what's going to determine the sex of the child? So it's the male that determines the sex of the child, because it's the sperm cell that carries either an X or a Y. Now just a couple little points here. One, do you remember when we were talking about reproduction, we talked about in vitro fertilization? When they use a sperm cell and they fertilize egg cell outside of the woman's body?
I know.
They can actually choose what type of sperm cell they use to fertilize it. If the parents want a boy, they can select a Y sperm cell to fertilize the egg. If they want a girl, they can choose an X sperm cell to fertilize the egg. So you can actually, in vitro fertilization, choose the gender of the child you're going to have.
That's not natural.
All right, Claudia?
How is the difference between the X and the Y?
Good question. So Claudia's asking, how do they know which sperm cells have which? Well, actually, if they centrifuge the sperm cells and spin them around very quickly, the more dense ones go to the bottom, the less dense ones come to the top. Which do you think are less dense, the X or the Y sperm?
X.
The Y. Because what did we say about the Y chromosome? It's much smaller. The X chromosome is much bigger, so the X sperm are more dense, they separate on the bottom, Y sperm go to the top, and then they can choose one of those to fertilize the egg. Jordan?
Is it more common or a girl?
No, not really. It's pretty close to 50-50. Jenna?
Not that this would ever happen. What if two Y chromosomes run into it?
They can't because you need an egg cell and you need a sperm cell.
No, but I mean like if a woman did.
Cell can never get a Y, so it just can't happen because every egg cell has an X in it.
No, I know it would never happen.
I know, but then so I can't really say what would happen if it like couldn't happen. We don't know, I guess. So my answer is we don't really know what would happen.
I'm like confused. Would that be like a test tube baby?
No, I mean sometimes they use that term. That term was used way back when they first did this. It's actually somewhat kind. So sometimes if a couple is having a difficult time conceiving a child naturally, there's lots of things they can do. They could go to a fertility doctor. Doctor can look and see if the sperm cells are okay. They can look and tell if a woman is ovulating properly. They could sometimes, a woman will take medications to encourage her to ovulate more regularly. If after trying some of these treatments, they don't work, sometimes the fertility doctor will choose to do in vitro fertilization, where they actually take an egg cell out of the woman's ovary, take a sperm cell from the male, and they actually fertilize it in the petri dish, let it divide a couple times to form the start of an embryo, and then they implant that back into the woman's uterus, and then she's pregnant. And it's still her child and the father's child. It came from their DNA. It just was fertilized outside of the body in the lab. So it's fairly common.
So say that your body can't produce as much sperm to make child.
Yep.
Is there a way for doctors or something to extract sperm from your body to insert it to the female?
Not quite. So one of the things they check, if a couple's having a difficult time conceiving a child, they might check what they call a sperm count and see if the man is producing sperm cells that are viable, that are able to fertilize an egg cell. And if they find that they're not, sometimes they can give special medications to encourage the male or try to find out why they're not producing viable sperm cells. Other times, so they're also sort of getting a little off topic here, but sometimes if a male is not producing sperm cells, okay, they can actually take a sperm cell from somebody else. So from what we call a sperm donor. Or sometimes a woman may want to have a child, but doesn't have a husband or a partner to have a child with. She just wants to have a child on her own. They can extract an egg cell from her body. They can do in vitro fertilization, but using a sperm cell from somebody else, somebody she might not know. Fertilize the egg cell, implant it, and then she'd be pregnant. It would be her child because it has half of her DNA. The other half would be from somebody who she doesn't know. So people do that sometimes. Grace?
Girls can run the world. I mean, in that science-y thing, we can always get girls.
Um,
and then we can run the world.
Well, we'll talk about cloning at the end of this. Well, we'll talk about cloning at the end of this section. But say that again in a couple weeks when we go over cloning, and we'll talk about that.
Cloning.
Okay. All right. So one other thing that sometimes this karyotype is produced oftentimes by taking a sample of cells from the developing fetus while it's still inside of the womb. They can actually use a very long needle. They can extract a little bit of this amniotic fluid, and in it are cells from the fetus. And they can analyze those cells for any genetic abnormalities. They can see if there's any problems that the parent might want to be aware of in advance. They can do a karyotype to see if it's a boy or a girl, to see if it has any chromosome abnormalities. They can check for all those things. Because there are times when a child is born with the incorrect number of chromosomes. There's a couple conditions in which a child can be born with an extra chromosome. By far the most common of those is Down syndrome. Down syndrome is the most common chromosome abnormality that children are born with. So this is a karyotype from a person that has Down syndrome. If you look at it carefully, can you find what the problem is? Sophia?
One has.
Yeah, if we look at all these chromosomes, they look fine. But then we get down here to the 21st set of chromosomes, and what we see is there's actually 3 of them. And that is what causes Down syndrome. Probably all know or have met somebody with Down syndrome before. It's caused when a person is born with one extra 21st chromosome. You see in both of these individuals, there's 3. And that may not sound like a big deal, like, oh, you just have one extra chromosome. But because there's an extra chromosome, their body produces extra proteins that are coded for on that protein. And it results in a whole series of different changes to their physiology that causes what we think of the symptoms or the signs of a person that has Down syndrome. It causes changes in the digestive system, causes some certain characteristic appearance to a person, causes some developmental delays in a person. All these different things together are what we call Down syndrome, and again, it's caused by that. What happens is sometimes the chances of having a child with Down syndrome increase with the age of the parents. Okay? So the parents are young, there's a relatively lower chance of having a child with Down syndrome. But as the parents get older, the likelihood of that happening increases. When the mother or the father could come from either parent, when their meiosis is happening and they're producing sperm and egg cells, sometimes the chromosomes don't split properly and there ends up to be this extra 21st chromosome. And that's what leads to Down syndrome.
So it's only in the 21st?
Only the 21st. There are other chromosome abnormalities, like trisomy 13 is when a person gets an extra 13th chromosome. It's a different set of conditions are result from having that extra 13th chromosome. But for Down syndrome, it's just the 21st. Is this a male or female? That's a male. An X and a Y, this is a female. Yes?
Is it more common? Wait, is it more common to have a Down syndrome in female or in male?
I think it's equally common. I don't think sex has any differences. All right, so just to kind of summarize, karyotypes. Karyotypes basically show a picture, a map, a diagram of a person's chromosome. Now these aren't labeled with X and Y, but you can still tell. Is this a male or a female? How do you know? They're not labeled X and Y, so how could you know? Grace?
Because the Y is shorter than or smaller than the X, so it's
Yeah. The Y is a small chromosome, so these are both the same size. They're both X chromosomes. So this is a female because they have 2 X chromosomes. How about this person? Brandon? That's a male, because you see they're 23rd. You have 2 different size chromosomes. The Y chromosome is really small, doesn't carry very much genetic information. So this is a male. And what do you notice about this person? Ethan?
The 21st chromosome has 3.
Yeah, they have 3 21st chromosomes, trisomy 21, also known as Down syndrome. All right, let's finish up with one last slide. So now we'll start to get into a little bit more of the details of genetics. So when we talk about genetics, we're studying heredity, how traits are passed on from parents to their offspring. We know we inherit our traits, our characteristics, our DNA, our chromosomes from our parents. Half of our DNA from each parent. Scientists only learned really about DNA over the last 70 or 80 years. But scientists obviously knew that offspring take after their parents. And one of the most important scientists that helped us understand heredity is this gentleman. His name is Gregor Mendel. He's known as the father of genetics. He lived in the 1800s. He was actually a monk, a religious person, but his hobby was studying plants. And what Mendel did was he grew thousands and thousands of pea plants. And he would crossbreed them by taking pollen from one plant, transferring it to the stigma of another plant, growing the seeds to see what the offspring was like. And he observed several different traits about the pea plants. The height of the plant, the color of the flower, the color of the pea, the texture of the pea. And he took very, very careful observations. Like I said, he grew thousands and thousands of plants and carefully recorded the traits, the characteristics of each one. And he started to observe some patterns. He saw the same ratio of plants keep coming up. And that led him to come up with some conclusions that we still know are true today. Even though he didn't know anything about DNA, he was able to figure this out by just studying and growing these pea plants. And what he concluded was that the traits he was observing, like the height of the plant, the color of the flower, were controlled by two factors. And one of each factor came from each parent. The color of the pea flower is controlled by two factors. One of those came from the male parent, and one came from the female parent. Each sex cell or each gamete contributes. We call them genes today, but he didn't call them genes, he called them factors. Did I say he was working in the 1700s?
You know, it's an 18.
Oh, I did. So tomorrow we'll talk about exactly what Mendel told us and how we could start to predict what the offspring of parents might be like using some of his information.